So if you're a politician, you can count the number of votes involved in people like this and a few other motives and decide, well, this is a good way to get elected. So everybody benefits except the ordinary person, it's a classic case of robbing from the poor to give to the rich at the price of the ordinary citizen of the world.
I'm Angela Wheeler for Climate Debrief. I'll be speaking with the chairman of the CO₂ Coalition, Princeton Professor Emeritus, Dr. William Happer. The CO₂ Coalition began in 2015 as a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. Dr. Happer, Rodney Nichols, Roger Cohen, and others wanted to ensure that science remained objective. The goal was to promote the fact that science produces empirical, measurable, objective facts and provides a means for testing hypotheses that can be replicated and potentially disproven. Why would science need a course correction? It seems that politics has corrupted one aspect of science, that is climate change. And we have asked Dr. Happer to provide some perspective. And Dr. Happer, at what point did you notice science was drifting off course with regards to climate?
Well, I had suspected there were problems quite early. I was director of energy research in the early 90s, 90 to 93, under Bush Sr. and later Clinton and Gore. And so I was responsible for all of the Department of Energy's basic research at that time, and I could see what we were spending taxpayers' money on, and I tried to learn about each of these areas, including climate. We were spending even then a lot of money on climate. And I really hadn't paid a lot of attention to it then. I knew a lot about the area because of previous work I'd done on the atmosphere, but not related to climate. It had to do with laser propagation, and but it's the same physics that's involved in climate. So we would invite in principal researchers from different fields we were supporting. They were looking for the top quark at that time, and so we'd have someone come from Fermi Lab in Chicago and tell us how things were going. Supporting work on the human genome at the time, and we'd have people come in who were building sequencing machines to tell us how much they had driven down the cost of sequencing a gene. And so most of these people were very happy to be invited to Washington to come and give their pitch to a bureaucrat. Hopefully they'd get some more money next year as a result. But the climate people were different even then. They were always very suspicious. Some of them would refuse to come even though, it was written into their DOE contract that they had to brief the DOE supporters. And so I was puzzled by this. And then when they would come and give a seminar, a normal scientific seminar, you ask lots of questions. That's the only way you can learn something. And they would be offended by any question. How are you questioning my competence? I've told you this is, this is how I do it. And I said, well, I always ask questions. I mean, that's normal in the seminar. How do you calibrate this instrument? I'm not questioning your ability. But they didn't take it that way. They were used to being little gods, telling people what the truth was and not being questioned. So this irritated their backer, Senator Gore. So as soon as he was elected vice president, he tried to get rid of me as soon as he could. That was okay with me. I was tired of being a bureaucrat. I wanted to go back to doing honest physics research again. So he did finally found out where I was in the org chart and have me fired, and I'm grateful to him for that. I don't have any hard feelings. But, we were doing a lot of good work back at my home lab in Princeton. They were kind enough to rehire me, and we continued work we were doing. And so I was distracted from thinking anything about climate for a number of years. And but eventually I became disturbed by all of the reports I would see on the evening news, with what I knew was one lie after another about the climate. And I would get upset, and my wife would say, well, if you're so upset, why don't you speak up and say something and tell them what the truth is? And so I finally decided perhaps the best way to do that would be to form a organization with the sole purpose of trying to get out the scientific facts about climate without any motive one way or the other. And so I got together with a few friends and we founded this CO₂ coalition, and the idea was to try and get out scientific facts and to focus only on CO₂. There are many organizations out there who are doing terrific work on climate, but it's not their main focus. It's one of many, often very worthwhile things that they are promoting.
You have devoted a lot of time to studying carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases and their effects on climate, but that seems to be where other scientists get it wrong. Could you explain their confusion?
Okay, well, let me say a little bit about the main physics involved in all of the panic about greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide and methane. Gases in the atmosphere, for the most part, are transparent to sunlight. It's very unusual to see a gas that absorbs sunlight. There are a few, but they're not very common. Iodine vapor, for example, is purple, but that's not, fortunately, very common in the Earth's atmosphere. So the way greenhouse gases work, and this has been understood for a century or a little bit more, is that they let sunlight come through the Earth's atmosphere, if there are no clouds, and reach the surface. They warm the surface. I'm paying attention to that now because I've just planted my backyard garden, and I go out and put my finger in the dirt every evening to see how warm it got. And the warmer it is, the faster the seeds come up. So the sunlight warms the ground, or it warms the ocean waters, surface waters. And if that's all that happened, they would just get warmer and warmer and warmer, and eventually, it would be too warm to live on the Earth. But that doesn't happen because the Earth is also radiating heat back to space. But the Earth's radiant heat is at much longer wavelengths than the radiant heat from the sun. And so, for example, sunlight wavelengths are typically a few hundred nanometers, maybe 600, 700 nanometers long. And thermal radiation from the Earth is 20, 30 times longer than that, so that much longer wavelength means that they don't penetrate the atmosphere as efficiently as sunlight. So thermal radiation from the Earth is absorbed by a number of gases. Water vapor by far is the most important. The air is always full of water vapor. Even in deserts, there's a lot of water vapor. Don't realize it, but it's there. And CO₂ is the second most important. So carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. A greenhouse gas is transparent to sunlight, but it's opaque to thermal radiation. That's all we mean by greenhouse gas, and I think it's a perfectly fine name. Some people object to it, but I'm quite okay with it. But the result of that is that since the Earth has a harder time radiating its thermal radiation back to space because the greenhouse gas is, it gets a little bit warmer than it would be if there were no greenhouse gases. And that's a good thing. It makes our planet habitable. Otherwise, it would be too cold for us to live here. So greenhouse effects are important. They've been understood for more than a century. They were discovered by an Anglo-Irish physicist named John Tyndall. And he was the first to notice that things like water vapor and CO2, which are completely transparent to sunlight, are opaque to infrared or partly opaque. And so I don't think for people who know about radiation transfer, and that often includes lots of astrophysicists and astronomers, but some physicists too, like me. I've done a lot of work on the edge of astrophysics. They've understood this very well. The first person to quantitatively show how to handle greenhouse gases was a German physicist, Karl Schwarzschild. He was a brilliant guy. He was the first one to solve Einstein's special theory of relativity in an analytic way. It was amazing. He did it within a few months. And what was even more amazing is he did it while he was on the front lines in World War I on the Russian front. So, but he nevertheless found enough time to continue to work on physics. And besides working on general relativity, he did the first analysis of how greenhouse gases work. And so we use his theory. It's perfectly valid, and not only realists, climate realists like myself, skeptic, I guess you would say, but also the competent, establishment climate scientists. There isn't any difference between what they calculate and what I calculate. And so the real competent scientists in the alarmist camp know perfectly well what the answer is. They've always known what it is. And the answer is that it's true that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, but it's not a very potent one. So if you double CO2 concentrations, it only diminishes radiation to space by 1%. So 100% increase of CO2, only a 1% effect. So it's a very impotent gas. And so the climate establishment knows this perfectly well. And the few people who actually know something know it perfectly well. Most of them don't know any physics or anything else. They know how to lobby their congressmen or their members of parliament, but they don't know any climate science. Some do. There are honorable exceptions, and they know that it's a small effect. But there's this background noise of, people who don't know anything, who demonize CO2. And so many people are misinformed. They don't realize that the really competent climate scientists have never claimed that CO2 has a big direct effect. And they've always known that you need something to amplify this small effect of CO2. So the only way you can honestly claim a danger from CO2 is that if its small direct effects are tremendously amplified, not by a little, but a lot. So this is the positive feedback issue, that the whole narrative of a danger from greenhouse gases is based on the existence of huge positive feedbacks, which almost never happen in nature. It's very unusual to see positive feedbacks in natural systems. Most natural systems have negative feedbacks. If you do one thing to them, they'll change, but then they'll figure out some way to try and get back to the way they originally were. That's called Le Chatelier's principle. It's very well known, very well established. It's probably true for climate too. So there, very, very likely there is no danger from increasing CO2. And what we try to explain in the CO2 coalition is even more. Carbon dioxide is in short supply. We're in a carbon dioxide famine in this era, and have been for several million years. And plants are not growing as well as they could if they had 2 times, 4 times more CO2 than today. Greenhouse operators understand that very clearly, and they double or triple the amount of CO2 in the greenhouse. You have to pay for it. It's not cheap, but it's worth doing it because you get such better quality flowers and fruits and yield. You get a better price, so it economically makes sense.
Do you see evidence that the promoters of a man-caused climate crisis are exploiting the complexity of the greenhouse effect?
Well, this is the climate alarm establishment is a very strange collection of people with different motives. There are sincere, ordinary citizens who've been convinced, been misled, and they think there is a dangerous crisis, and if there's a crisis, you should try to do something to fix it. So they're trying to do that, and I feel a little sorry for them because they have been misled. They're decent people, good people, but they're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist, and in the process, they're doing lots of harm. And then there are people with less pure motives, who are becoming very wealthy, from selling solar panels, selling sustainability, selling, wind turbines, to green up the planet, supposedly. They don't make the planet green at all. They cover, thousands of acres, Yeah, they used to talk about the cattle on 1,000 hills, and now it's, black solar panels on 1,000 hills.
Exactly.
So it's actually harming the environment. It's not helping at all. And so that's another force that is sustaining climate hysteria. And then, given all of the sincere people and all of the opportunists, this means they need political representation. So if you're a politician, you can count the number of votes involved in people like this, and there are a few other motives, and decide, well, this is a good way to get elected. And so they get supported in elected bodies, and they in turn funnel money into these organizations that are promoting the message. And so everybody benefits except the ordinary person, it's a classic case of robbing from the poor to give to the rich, because the people who are making money are already extremely rich, and they're getting richer yet at the price of the ordinary citizen of the world.
It has seemed to me that there has been sort of a manipulation of about greenhouse gases actually do. Carbon capture seems to be the next in the line of the solar panels and the wind turbines. And so it does seem to be a very profitable industry.
Yeah, well, humanity has to cope with mass popular delusions like this in every generation. The last really big one in our country was prohibition. You couldn't oppose prohibition, even though many people pointed out that it may not be that easy to enforce. It might encourage organized crime, might encourage contempt for the law. It did all those things and worse. And so even though we passed a constitutional amendment prohibiting alcohol, we had to repeal it 15 years later. So the climate movement is a lot like the prohibition movement. People who supported prohibition in many cases had good motives. They were, it's true that alcohol has destroyed lots of families, and so you could understand why they would be pushing this. But, if you apply the wrong solution to a real problem, you make it worse, usually. In this case, there isn't even a problem.
So you're saying there isn't really a problem, yet there are solutions that will actually reduce freedom, will cause government to force people to, buy certain appliances, to buy electric vehicles. And so in that sense, it's a freedom issue.
Electric vehicles work. Henry Ford had to compete with electric vehicles. They were around even in his day. And they have the same problems today as they had then, that they have limited range. And that's fine if you're living in a little suburban community like mine in Princeton. There are a lot of Teslas here, and they work just fine. But you only have to drive 10 or 20 miles a day, so that's no problem. So I think, we should let the market decide whether you buy an electric vehicle or not. It makes perfect sense for some people. And it doesn't make any sense at all for many others. And so that's a choice you should make, not the government.
Is it offensive that someone like you, with your credentials and distinguished academic career, could be labeled a skeptic or denier by people that you know are manipulating data?
Well, I'm actually, I take being labeled a skeptic with gratitude. I think every good scientist should be a skeptic. That's part of the scientific method is you're skeptical. Denier is just, an attempt to demonize people like me because you're supposed to think of Holocaust denier when they call you a climate denier, that the climate is today's Holocaust and the virtuous people are saving the planet and the evil, deniers, the sons of the Nazis are making it worse. So denier is not a nice word, but I don't care. I don't have any respect for the people who use it.
Dr. Happer, thank you for your time and thorough explanations.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you for watching. The Climate Debrief podcast is funded by listeners like you. If you enjoyed listening to this episode of Climate Debrief, please like, comment, and subscribe. We read all of your feedback. If you are interested in finding out more about the CO₂ Coalition and its mission, visit our website at co2coalition.org. Our host and executive producer is Angela Wheeler. Production by Ethan Audie and Scott Wheeler. Technical production and editing by Joseph von Spakowski.